This is the Power Break Podcast number 169, titled Correctly Assessing Ourselves. Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Brubaker, along with JT, as we hope you'll stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life.
This is the Power Break Podcast with a focus on the spiritual, the mental, and the physical aspects, all to help you succeed in the race of life. For show notes from today's podcast, go to BobBrubaker.com and follow the link for the Power Break Podcast. As I was pointing out, my friend, you are one sharp-dressed man today. And it makes me feel so unprofessional.
Too bad we're not doing video. It'd be a real contrast, wouldn't it?
Oh, I'd dress up if we were doing video.
Well, I'm not doing it to... actually, I did it because I'm here to represent the Power Break Podcast with my friend John Tribino, also known as JT.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I actually represent a mountain man perfectly right now. I'm unshaven and dropped the boys off this morning. Now I got some, mountain man stuff I got to get done.
Split some wood and cut down the weeds, whatever, right?
I am going to split wood. That's really funny. But yeah, something like that.
Yeah, we always begin, but it's a sincere moment, folks, that we always talk about the fact that we appreciate you leaving a rating and or a review wherever you download the podcast. It means a lot to us, and it really does help to get the word out about the Power Break Podcast. So we appreciate it very much and hope that you'll continue to do that.
Yeah, it's always humbling, and it's funny. I had an opportunity. My friend Brian was up here this weekend with his son Henry, and they came up to do a little mountain biking. But I know Brian because he's a deacon at Indian Rocks Church back in Clearwater, and he was talking about how much he's been listening to the Power Break. So, stories like that, man, are just so awesome. And leaving a review and letting other people know that you're getting something out of it is so important, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all very much. Well, today, JT, we're talking about correctly assessing ourselves. Have you ever seen someone incorrectly assessing themselves?
Oh, yeah, of course. So I like how you said someone, so I don't have to focus on myself. So thank you for writing it like that, by the way. But yeah, it was really funny. We were doing this. I used to do this SWAT competition. It was called SWAT Roundup. It was an international competition. SWAT teams from around Europe, from around the United States, we all got together. And, it's really about sharing our different tactics and really kind of, keeping ourselves professional on an international level. You can learn so much from other countries when it comes to SWAT stuff and how they do things. So, but anyway, there was a guy that was on our SWAT team that hadn't been to Roundup in a long time, because normally that's the younger guys, that are still in really good shape. And, as you get older, I got more cerebral as a SWAT operator as opposed to more of a, knuckle dragger bullying my way through things. And it was really funny because through the whole training process, like the younger guys on the team kept telling him, they're like, dude, you need to go home and look in the mirror, man. You're not a spring chicken. I don't know why you're out here trying to do the obstacle course and all this stuff. So it was really funny that after the obstacle course, which is the last competition of the week, so it's a week-long competition, and every day has a different exercise, basically, and you get ranked based on time and how accurate your shooting was and stuff like that. Well, the obstacle course is always the last day, and after the obstacle course, we left and we were on our way back to Largo, and we stopped at Cracker Barrel and we were eating, and he had done pretty awful on the obstacle course, like really awful. And he's like, man, I don't understand it, man. I mean, I work out. I've been doing everything. I just don't understand it. Because, he's like, and all of a sudden one of the younger guys just looks at him and he goes, dude, you're old. I don't know what to tell you. You're old. That's why you didn't perform the way you wanted to, because you probably didn't have any business being out there. So it was like, I always laugh because a lot of people, when they look in the mirror, they see something very differently than what reality is.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And I really see that a lot in our political environment, in our social environment right now. So I'm so excited to talk about this today. How about you, man? Have you ever seen someone else so we don't have to focus on ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I've been guilty of it too. I will talk about that in the article that I wrote. But yes, we do see people all the time. And that's why it is important to take a good look at ourselves and really see it for what we are, see if we are meeting the standard we need to meet or want to meet. As every athlete regularly tests their skills and their fitness to see where they are and what they need to do to improve. So we all need to do that in all aspects of life to correctly assess ourselves, especially when it comes to the spiritual side of life. As it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5, examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith and test yourselves, or do you not realize this about yourselves, that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you fail to meet the tests.
Yeah. Let's continue to talk more about that as we turn to your blog. Folks, if you haven't been to BobBrubaker.com, I will always encourage you to do that. Check out the resources. Check out the books, and the books are priced to sell. They're basically what it costs for us to print them up and send them to you. So, but check those things out. But at the very least, sign up for the blog. It'll come free of charge every Monday, get you started on your week the right way. But let's continue to talk more about correctly assessing ourselves.
Well, I wrote in the article just some highlights here that we all tend to think more highly of ourselves than we ought to think. A weekend warrior athlete tends to think of himself or herself on a plane similar to a professional. That is, until they actually are around a professional and they get to correctly assess themselves.
Yeah, that happens
with
quick.
that standard. If that tendency is true for athletes of all sorts, it's certainly true of all aspects of life. Take marriage, for instance. If you ask any given couple how their marriage is doing, they generally say, well, we're doing fine. But if you give them a standard by which they can correctly assess themselves, they see the need for improvement. The Bible is very clear about correctly assessing ourselves when it comes to our spiritual maturity. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 3, it says, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned." Again, if you ask a typical church member if they are mature, they will tell you how long they've been a follower of Jesus Christ or how many years they've been a member of this given church. But the real proof is in their lives. Here's a few assessments that I wrote about and encourage you to check out the article. The assessment is, are you serving or are you spectating? I think there's a lot of spectators, wouldn't you say, JT?
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, that tends to be our tendency unless we're conscious of it, right?
Yeah, what do they say that in normal church life, 20% of the people do 80% of the work there. And
for sure.
And that's sad. It's a sad assessment, but, the question that we should all ask, are we spectating or are we serving? The second question was, are you evangelizing or are you a secret disciple? It's really easy to be the secret disciple saying, well, I'm living my life so others see Christ in me. Well, that should be the case, but we have to speak the word sometime, and we're told to be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks for the reason for the hope that is in us in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. A third area is your sensitivity to sin in your life. Is it growing, or have you become insensitive to the little things to a place where you feel like there's no sin at all, or at least avoid any need for confession of sin to God regularly?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yep. It sure is. Yeah, in 1 John chapter 1, it says, "This is the message we've heard of him and proclaimed to you, that God is light and in him is no darkness. And we say we have fellowship with him. While we walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth." So we have to have that sensitivity to sin, and if we are not sensitive any longer to sin, calling us to confess, maybe we need to reassess ourselves.
Yeah.
Are you? The fourth one is: are you using the things that you've been taught in the Word, or are you just proud of what you have learned, so that you seem to be hoarding knowledge rather than using it to share with others? That is found in the book of Hebrews chapter 5. He says, the time that you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again because you haven't used what you've been learning. As one old preacher said, some people are taught far beyond their level of service.
Yeah,
big
for sure.
Question, big question. And the fifth one is, are you hungry to learn or grow, or are you content with just feeling like you've arrived and there's no need for any further growth or improvement? That's a very important question for us, all of assessments that we take a look at our spiritual life. I think I've told that story before, but there was a lady in the first church that I served. She called me over to her house, and she told me, she said, Pastor, I just want you to know that I've been a member of this church, I forget how many years. And she says, I've heard preachers all these years. And she says, as you said, look at those commentaries on the wall over there. She says, I've gone through those commentaries. And she said, so I just wanted to let you know that I don't need to come to church.
Oh, Lordy. Yeah. Yeah. That's, that happens a lot, and it's such a dangerous thing.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah. Anyway, the article is titled the correctly assessing ourselves, and some real challenges there in that article, and encourage you to check it out today. You'll find it along with anything else at BobBrubaker.com.
So what else is happening, Bob? Any news we need to know about?
I thought it'd be a good time to correctly assess ourselves and bring up the book that my wife and I put together called Strength Training for Your Love Life, a 30-day challenge that we turned into a 40-day challenge. But you'll check it out and find out there's some challenges for every day to apply to your marriage, to use as a guide to looking and see how good your marriage is. Anyway, it's called Strength Training for Your Love Life, and you'll find it at BobBrubaker.com. And while you're there, check out the sermon links that the sermons I preach here at Christ Community Presbyterian Church in Clearwater, Florida, currently going through the book of Acts. And you'll find those sermon links along with other things at BobBrubaker.com.
This is the Power Break Podcast, and I'm JT along with Bob Brubaker, and this is time on the podcast for questions and answers. If you have a question for me or Bob, feel free to email me at jt@bobbrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering your question on an upcoming Power Break podcast. And, interestingly, Bob, I just want to throw in that a lot of what we talk about is the result of feedback, so I would encourage people, just let us know what's on your mind. Let us know what you'd like us to discuss in regard to, biblical perspective on the things that are on your mind. Because, we love to get feedback from people.
Yeah, I was talking to a person the other day. We were talking about the promises of God, and it's interesting how few people really have in mind the promises of God. So I think I'm going to, and this is a kind of a teaser. Hopefully I can tease it out and come up with it. I think about an article about a pocket full of promises, having the promises of God with us all the time. And based on when I was in college, I used to carry around this book called the Jesus Person Pocket Promise Book.
Yeah, I remember that. That thing is teeny, too. You need to have good eyesight to read it.
Yeah. Anyways, it was very helpful to have when I have a situation, didn't know what to do. I just turn to the promises of God, and that's what we can do. Anyway, hopefully I'll tease that out and come up with an article, and then from the article, JT and I will come up with a podcast. And I know JT will have a lot to say about that one, so we're looking forward to it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I always got a lot to say about a lot of stuff. All right, so let's go back to assessing ourselves, which may directly correlate to me having things to say. So from a spiritual side of life, you mentioned 5 areas of assessing ourselves in your blog. So what do you think is the most important area of our spiritual life to assess?
That's a good question. I talked about assessing whether we're serving or spectating, assessing whether we're evangelizing or we're really a secret disciple, which there is no such thing, by the way. Talked about the sensitivity to sin, or just allowing things in your life and not even concerned about those things. Right. Or if you're using the things you've been taught, or you're just proud of what you've learned and just have a plethora of knowledge, but you're not using it. And then the last one is, are you hungry to grow, or are you just content where you are? And I think the real assessment comes right back to what 2 Corinthians 13, verse 5 says, examine yourselves, see whether you are in the faith, and test yourselves. You realize this about you, that Jesus Christ is in you. And if that is not the case, he says, unless indeed you fail to meet the test. That's the test. That's the ultimate test. And really that's what the basis of all other parts of the tests are, that I've just brought up. What say you, JT? I would think you have a assessment. You like to assess things a lot, and rightly so.
Yeah, for sure. It's so easy to assess other people first, and we are so guilty of that. Our news does it. we do it, we judge people by the cover of the book, right? Which we've always, I mean, Granny was teaching me way back in the day, you never judge a book by its cover, and I think readjusting how you look at things is so important when it comes to that. By, you first look at the sin that's in your life, and what it does is it just reminds you that we're all sinners and we are all falling short. And it just allows us to have grace towards each other, which I think is ultimately the most important thing in your Christian walk, is grace and love towards other people. I love in Revelation 2:5, when Christ says, listen, go back to the things you first did. There's that reset button that we've talked about over the years. It's go back to the stuff that you first did, or I will come and I will remove your lampstand. And, that's really a great reminder of look at yourself and do those things that keep you focused on Christ and allowing Christ to work through you. It's so important.
That's right. It's interesting that you bring that up, because that was written and to the 7 churches of Asia, and of course that particular section of Revelation 2 is written to the church at Ephesus. And it just makes me think, because as we're recording this, I'm getting ready to preach from Acts chapter 20, when Paul addresses the elders of the church at Ephesus. And it's interesting because if they would have really followed what Paul said, there have been a lot of these things that the Lord Jesus Christ found fault in that particular church.
Right.
It wouldn't have turned out that way. But yeah, that's an important thing. I was thinking about correctly assessing ourselves. I remember the time that you and I decided to assess ourselves about our physical fitness in our cycling, and we were following Chris Carmichael's, what was it, an 8-minute test? I think it was.
Yeah, it was long. I remember that, because I remember getting to about the 4-minute mark going, I'm only halfway? This is insane.
Yeah, because it has you ride with all your might for 8 minutes, and then you go back and look and see what your wattage was, how many watts you were putting out on an average. And also, I think there's something else about your heart rate, and could figure out your VO2 max. Anyway, JT and I thought, well, we'll figure this one out. We've got about killed both of us, especially when he said you had to do at least 2 of them to get a correct assessment.
Yeah, it was. Do you remember? That's when my the hub on my rear wheel broke. Do you remember?
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, see that. Goes to show you were so strong you just broke the bike.
Yeah, I'm sure that was it. Something tells me that was a defect that started a long time ago. But anyway, let's get to question number 2 from the mental aspect. So why is self-examination or self-assessment so important?
I think it is so important because, even though this is a mental question about the mental aspects of life, but it sure addresses it in Romans chapter 12 and verse 3 when it says, "For by the grace of God given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think." Now, I don't know. We all do that, right? When you say, "How you doing?" "Well, I'm doing great today," and how are you doing in this area of life? And everybody, the first assessment that we have, we have to say that we probably assess ourselves pretty high.
Oh yeah,
would you say
sure.
that?
Yeah. It's funny. In mountain biking, there is nothing better to do than to videotape yourself. Because, everything's about body position and how you're using your body weight, whether you're separating yourself from the bike and letting the bike work underneath you. There's all kinds of things, techniques-wise, and you think that, I think, oh, man, I got this nailed. Then somebody videotapes it. I'm like, oh, man, I was way too far back on the bike, or whatever. It's funny because I've seen people that take like lessons from an expert, on whatever it is. And they get told, hey, listen, what you're doing is incorrect. You should do it this way. And they actually have the nerve to be like, oh, that guy doesn't know what he's doing. Like, they just don't want to examine themselves or apply what's given to them. And it's crazy to me. Like, I remember when I used to teach, I used to have a hard time teaching police officers because everybody's a type A personality, super aggressive, it's my way or the highway kind of people, but what I used to teach was stuff that I actually knew a lot about. I'm not going to go as far as to say I was an expert, but I certainly was the expert in the room, if you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
And man, it was like, they're like, I don't think that's going to work. And I'm like, you haven't even tried it yet. I'm not entirely sure why you're automatically doing that. But it's because what they think is good or will work is different. And therefore, they don't want to assess themselves and apply something new. It's Bob, I think it goes back to pride. What do you think?
I think so. Even as it says in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12, it says, therefore let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. In other words, it's the pride behind it. A story there that I thought would bring up my friend that I went to a real big triathlon one time, and they had John Cobb there. John was the first to do wind tunnel tests with people at actually Texas A&M, and he found the correct position for the bicycle seat and how you should look on a time trial bike or the bikes they use for triathlons.
Right.
So my friend, this is not something you really should do, but it was the day before the race, and so he had his bike fitted for him by John Cobb, and he paid a couple $100 for this to happen. And he was, doing this kind of on a quickie sense, but you got his expert opinion. So my friend took his bike back to his room and readjusted it.
Oh, no. Back to the way it was. Come on.
I don't know about even back to the way it was. He just said, he paid this good money. And I said, what did you pay the money for if you're not going to listen to the guy?
It's insane.
He said, well, I don't think that'll work that way. So it's kind of what you were saying.
You're the expert in the room, I guess. Yeah. That's so funny. But there was a day that I would have done the same thing. So who am I to judge? All right, let's turn to the physical aspect. Question number 3. Let's talk about early morning workouts, which I don't like, and how a person can incorporate them into a busy life without missing out on a good night's sleep.
Now, first of all, I think we need to talk about the benefits of getting up early in the morning.
I knew you were going to go that way. And, you're right. Every single time I go to bed early and wake up early, I feel good and I have a good day. I know it's not a coincidence, but I think, I don't want to assess myself. You see how I work that in?
Yeah, that's a great transition. It's interesting how many things you can get finished, or you can get a great start on things just by getting up early in the morning. But let's just go on to what we're talking about. How do we do that? Here's some ideas, and I'd be glad to hear yours. But the first thing that you hear from the experts is cut back on your caffeine by early afternoon. Yep. Because if you want to get up early and still get a good night of rest, you need to cut down the caffeine because later it goes in the day. I think they say like 2 o'clock if you go to bed, like at 8:30 or something like that.
Yeah.
So anyway,
right.
And they also say to cut back on your alcohol in the evening, and that makes sense because that gives you a false sense of relaxation, because it does seem to give a person relaxation, they say, but it's short-lived. And so what happens is when the alcohol wears off and you might be in bed asleep and all of a sudden, bing, you're wide awake.
Right.
So,
Yep.
The experts say to reduce your blue light exposure in the evening. That means any kind of exposure to screens, be it your television, be it your iPhone or your cell phone, or even a pad or whatever it is. It has an emission of blue light, and that just sets your brain to say, work, 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 work. Don't relax.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. That is for sure. The blue light thing is a big deal. I've met a lot of people up here wear the blue light glasses at night.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty good thing. And also you can get a setting for your phone or your iPad or whatever it is, and even your computer. The other thing they say to do if you want to get a good workout in the morning is set your stuff out the night before, because nothing is worse than getting up in the morning, you're groggy and trying to look for your bike shorts.
Yes, for sure, yeah.
Especially your wife is sleeping and you walk in and turn on the light to find
Yeah, no, I think all of us have been walking around with the flashlight on our iPhone trying to find something, and it's no bueno, that's for sure.
And they say if you want to get a good night's rest, get to bed earlier. That seems like a given. One of the things they say is to cut back the temperature during the sleeping hours. Now, you probably don't have that problem because you probably have cool nights, don't you, now that you're up in the mountains?
Oh, yeah, no, it's awesome, man. It's, we throw a little fan on, and it's starting to get to be, in the 50s at night, which is pretty awesome. And yeah, it's great sleeping weather for sure. Even the dogs are different. Like the dogs are happier. It's crazy.
Is that right?
Yeah, they're more chipper. It's pretty funny to watch.
Believe it or not, they say to make sure your room is dark because there's always some light that sneaks into your room, and that can keep you awake at night and keep you from getting a good night of rest.
Yep.
And also having a consistent wake-up time. It seems to happen to me even whether I want to or not, and they say actually better for you if you consistently wake up at the same time. Also, it makes real good sense if you want to have a good workout early in the morning to always make sure that you work out with a friend. That's kind of called accountability. I never will forget. I used to meet a guy when I lived up in Ohio, and we would meet early on one day of the week, and we would run 10 miles together through the woods. And both of us showed up one morning during a blizzard.
Oh, that's awesome. And there was no way you were going to meet each other or no way you were going to run if you weren't going to meet him. There's no way.
And that was the first thing we said when we met each other. If I didn't know you were going to be here, I wouldn't be here right now.
That's so true, though. So true.
And another thing, believe it or not, they said that helps you work out in the morning is to make sure you turn on some bright lights when you first get up in the morning. It actually sets off that cortisol. So there you go.
Hey,
anything you have to add to that?
No, those are all good. Those are all great things. It's funny with the dark, making sure that your room is dark. It is so dark out here on top of a mountain, and there's
I bet so.
There's so many trees between us and our neighbors that you can't see any lights. All you see is just dark. And my friend Brian, it was funny when he walked outside. He goes, "Man, this is like darkety dark. He's like, this is crazy. It's like one of those, like you walk outside, you're like, man, this is super dark. It's almost creepy if you're not used to it,
Yeah.
But that is so true. I mean, we don't have to close any windows or do anything like that. And we can just wake up in the morning when the sun starts to come up. It's really pretty awesome.
Wow. Good stuff here. Well, as we talk about these things about getting up early, the discipline of getting up early and working out, there's something special about that. But as we mentioned, these various things that can help, it takes discipline. And in all aspects of life, as we say, it takes discipline because discipline does make the difference in all aspects of life. Check out today's show notes at BobBrubaker.com. Click on the Power Break podcast. Today's show is number 169.
And submit your questions by email to jt@bobbrubaker.com and listen for our answer on an upcoming Power Break podcast.
Quick word for the Strength Training for Your Love Life, a book that my wife and I put together. It's really a 40-day challenge with some help there. It's called Strength Training for Your Love Life. You'll find that book at bobbrubaker.com. Click on the resources, scroll down through the resources to the books, and scroll through the books. You'll find it. Strength Training for Your Love Life.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us for the Power Break podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review wherever you've downloaded the podcast, and check out show notes, news, Bob's weekly blog, and other cool things at bobbrubaker.com. And listen next time for the Power Break podcast.